as a financial advisor, I see 3 signs that tell me you might be ready to retire early, even if it doesn't feel like it. And what I find is that not knowing these signs can cost you time, freedom, and options that you may already have without even realizing it. So in this video, we're gonna walk through what those 3 signs are in plain English with examples so you can figure out if early retirement is actually possible for you and what to do next if it is. Now, a lot of folks I work with have built real wealth, but sometimes that lingering doubt can still creep in. Do I really have enough? And the truth is that sometimes that question is hard to answer, even when your numbers seem strong. Take someone who saved over $3 million. That's objectively in the top percent of retirement savers, but subjectively, it's still common to still wonder, is that enough for me? Is that enough for me to actually retire early? And that's because most retirement advice fixates on the dollar amount you have saved. So we end up comparing our own number to some invisible benchmark or some headline that we read about online. And it sort of starts to create this fog of uncertainty, even for people who've done everything right. But here's what really matters. Most people fixate on their savings total, but the real number that matters is your spending. The best retirement quote that I've heard, I don't know exactly who to attribute it to, but it's not at what amount you can retire, it's about at what income. So let's talk about the first sign you might be more ready than you think when it comes to early retirement. And it's, do you actually know what your retirement lifestyle will cost? I talk with pre-retirees all the time who've saved anywhere from $2 million to $10 million, and oftentimes I find the uncertainty comes down to truly not understanding their spending, and also how that will evolve over the course of their retirement. Many assume spending will just figure itself out, maybe it'll cost less, or they'll just adjust on the fly, but often the trap is that instead of looking at your own numbers, you end up looking at everyone else and think they apply to you. But when you do know your numbers, when you know what it takes to fund your lifestyle, cover healthcare, travel, give generously, or just simply live, then you're not just saving aimlessly, you're planning intentionally. And sometimes I talk with clients who find the opposite to be true. Maybe they've saved even more. They've saved $4 million and they learn that their lifestyle is very manageable to the point where I have to actually encourage them to spend more. I have to encourage them to spend money, and that unlocks something, knowing that maybe you do have more than enough to retire early because you have a clear handle on your retirement spending needs. And if you are someone in that position, you're already ahead of 95% of people out there. Now, knowing your expenses is huge because then you can sort of back into the number that you actually need saved in a portfolio. So you use a portfolio as a tool. But the next green flag I'd often see that tells me you're going to be in a good position to retire early is that you're willing to be flexible. What happens when you retire and the market drops 30%? Unfortunately, a lot of people cling to rules of thumb like the 4% rule, almost like it's gospel, and it's very helpful. Don't get me wrong, it was back-tested data back in the 90s showing that a 4% annual withdrawal rate had a very, very high success rate over the traditional 30-year retirement. But was it designed for actual practical use? Not necessarily. And the unfortunate thing is that many people interpret the rule as something static. Focusing too much on a static rule like the 4% rule could potentially lead you to believe that you need to work longer. Because if you think 4% is the maximum safe withdrawal and your portfolio isn't necessarily big enough right when you retire, maybe you're retiring before Social Security, you assume that you need to keep saving. But history tells a very different story. Actually, sustainable withdrawal rates have often been higher than 4%, rarely below 5%, except for quite possibly one of the worst times to retire, which was the mid-60s. Now, hindsight is 20/20, and we can't predict the future being better or necessarily worse than that. The real key here is flexibility. If you're someone that is not married to their expenses, if you're open to adjusting your withdrawals based on market conditions, we use the risk-based guardrails approach for our clients, which is a little bit more dynamic and a little bit more on the complex side when it comes to taxes, retirement, longevity, but the concept is the same. And being able to adjust can not only help on the downside, but also help with the upside. For example, if we look at this chart of a retiree that retired in the year like 1986, starting with 4.3% withdrawal rate, because markets were favorable when they retired, their income increased over 160% over the first 4 years, the next 4 years of their retirement. So that might look like starting with a lower withdrawal rate and increasing it over time as risk goes on the plan, as you understand what type of market you're retiring into. That way you're not locking yourself into an unnecessarily conservative lifestyle, but you're also not overexposing yourself early on when it comes to spending. Look, markets are going to change, life is going to change, your retirement income needs is going to change. It's never about finding the perfect number, it's about being able to adjust when necessary. Look, rules of thumb might be a little too conservative and they might be convincing you that you need to work longer than necessary. But we're not done quite yet, because even if you have the best withdrawal strategy, know your expenses down to the last penny, without this one last piece, you could still be putting your retirement at risk. There's a saying, concentration is how you get wealthy, but diversification is how you stay wealthy. Most people I work with have done an amazing job building their wealth, saving for retirement, but my job as an advisor is to make sure they don't have to start that process all over again. Because what worked over the past 30 years may not work over the next 30 years. I often have clients that have significant amounts of concentration, which maybe helped get them there, but they didn't realize the risk until you model out what that could do to your retirement. And even more common is that someone will come to me and unknowingly concentrate their holdings in one sector, maybe a few big names. But sometimes we have to look back at history a little bit further than the last 5-10 years. That's because global markets behave differently. History shows that the top performing countries actually change quite frequently, often unpredictably. For example, if we look at 2019, New Zealand had the highest return of any country, and just 2 years later, they're near the bottom. Over a 20-year stretch, Denmark actually led with a 13.5% annualized rate of return. But we take the lost decade from 2000 to 2009, the S&P 500 returned a -% cumulatively. But globally diversified during that same period actually held up pretty well. The concept is having stocks that perform differently at different times can help you better protect your retirement. And diversification matters even more once you're retired, simply because you're no longer adding to the pot. You're drawing from it. And downturns hit harder when you're taking income, and a concentrated portfolio can be devastating if it drops early in retirement. And that's why diversification helps kind of cushion those hits. This is why if you have a diversified portfolio or have a strategy to diversify, that's a major green flag for me, and it ensures you're not just relying on what's worked in the past, but you're starting to become prepared for whatever life throws your way in the future. So what does this all mean for you? It means that retirement isn't just about hitting a certain savings number or following outdated rules. It's about understanding the big picture, your expenses, your flexibility, and how diversified you are. Retirement readiness isn't just about a net worth or portfolio size. It's about clarity. Do you understand your numbers and what that means for your life? Can you continue your lifestyle? Flexibility. Can you adjust without panicking? And of course, protection. Are you prepared for the risks that matter the most when you are in retirement? So if you can say yes to these 3 signs, you might have more than enough to retire early. Enjoy the freedom that you've worked so hard for, even if it doesn't feel like it right now. But there are a few things I've noticed from my clients on the non-financial side that help them enjoy life more. And it wasn't something they added to their plate, it's actually something they stopped doing. So watch this video to find out what my clients stopped doing in order to enjoy life more. And if you'd like to talk to me or someone on my team about your plan to retire early, click the link in the description and we'd love to chat with you.